2,000 years ago, in the heart of the Roman Empire, the crowd's roar could shake the very stones of the Colosseum. Tens of thousands of voices merged into one, demanding blood, spectacle, and glory. The gladiator games were not simply entertainment. They were a political weapon, a ritual of power, and a reflection of Rome itself. A city built on discipline, ambition, and brutality. Imagine stepping into the arena. The sun blinds you, the sand burns under your feet, and the smell of sweat, iron, and dust fills the air. Around you, the crowd rises like a living wall, their eyes fixed on you alone. Some cheer for your survival, others crave your death. For them, your life is nothing more than a fleeting distraction, a story told in blood and broken bones. But the life of a gladiator did not begin with glory. Most of them were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war dragged from distant provinces. Shackled and beaten, they were sold into the ludus, the gladiator schools. There, under the watchful eye of the lanista, the brutal trainer, men were forged into weapons. Their bodies hardened by endless drills, their minds trained to obey without hesitation. Every mistake was punished, every weakness crushed. And yet, within the walls of the training grounds, hope flickered. For some, survival in the arena promised freedom. For others, fame and gold. The greatest gladiators became legends, adored by the Roman people like modern-day superstars. Their names were carved into graffiti, their faces painted on pottery, their victories sung in taverns. A slave could become more famous than a senator if he survived long enough. Still, every man who stepped into the arena knew the truth. The games were a gamble with death. Behind the thunder of the crowd and the gleam of polished armor, there was always the cold edge of a blade waiting to strike. The story of the gladiators is the story of Rome itself, magnificent and ruthless, glorious and cruel. And it begins not with the clash of swords, but with the desperate hope of survival inside the iron gates of the ludus. Inside the walls of the ludus, the gladiator school, life was ruled by discipline and fear. Days began before sunrise when the clang of iron bells summoned the fighters to the training yard. There, under the relentless eyes of the trainers, men repeated the same strikes and defenses until their arms shook from exhaustion. Wooden swords turned their palms raw, heavy shields bent their backs, and every misstep was punished with blows. The training was not only physical. The doctors, experienced veterans, taught tactics, footwork, and the art of reading an opponent's eyes. A gladiator was more than a brute with a weapon. He was an actor in a deadly theater. He had to fight not only to survive, but to entertain. A cowardly strike, an ugly stumble, or a quick boring kill could earn the crowd's hatred, and in Rome the crowd's voice was power. Weapons varied according to the class of fighter. The Murmillo carried a heavy shield and sword, his helmet crowned with a crest like a sea fish. The Retiarius fought lightly armed, with a net and trident, relying on speed and cunning. Others bore curved blades, whirling chains, or even armor, designed to mock defeated enemies of Rome. Each type of gladiator was crafted to create contrast, to pit strength against agility, steel against strategy. At night the barracks echoed with whispers. Some gladiators plotted escape, though few succeeded. Others prayed to strange gods, begging for strength. Bonds formed between men who might tomorrow face each other in combat. The school was both a prison and a forge, shaping broken men into weapons of spectacle. And yet, for all the brutality, there was also honor. Victories brought gifts, better food, even the chance of freedom. The wooden sword of release, The rudis was the dream of every fighter, a symbol that a man had conquered both Rome's enemies and Rome's thirst for blood. But before that reward came endless trials, and the first test for every new gladiator was the same: to survive his debut match. The gates of the arena waited, and behind them lay either death or the first step toward immortality.
The day of the debut was unlike any other. At dawn, the gladiators were led from their barracks to the underground chambers of the arena, the Hypogeon. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and iron chains. Above, the roar of thousands of voices already shook the stone. Rome had gathered for blood. The new fighters stood in silence, listening. Some whispered prayers, others clenched their fists until their knuckles turned white. The veterans gave no comfort. They had all walked this path and they knew well. The arena spared no one. When the gates creaked open, sunlight blinded them. They stepped onto sand stained with the memories of countless battles. Trumpets blared, the crowd erupted, chanting for spectacle. In that moment, every man ceased to be a prisoner. He became part of Rome's greatest performance. The editor of the games, a wealthy politician seeking fame, raised his hand. His decision meant life or death. He announced pairings, and the matches began. Swords clashed, shields thundered, nets flew through the air. Blood painted the sand. Some men fell quickly, their screams drowned by the crowd's cheers. Others fought with skill so dazzling that even their enemies hesitated to strike the final blow. The crowd was merciless. They demanded beauty in violence. They loved the duel of opposites, the heavy Murmillo cornering the swift Retiarius, or the nimble Thraex dancing around a heavily armored Secutor. Every move was theater, every wound a spectacle. And when a fighter collapsed, beaten but alive, all eyes turned to the editor. The gladiator would raise his finger, begging for mercy. Then the crowd decided if they roared for death, the editor's thumb would fall and the victor was bound to deliver the final strike. If mercy was granted, the beaten man lived to fight another day, though scars would forever mark his body. For those who survived, the debut was only the beginning. The arena had tasted their fear, and Rome demanded more. Each victory brought a whisper of glory, each survival another step toward fame. Yet behind every cheer, every golden coin thrown from the stands, lingered the shadow of death.
As weeks turned into months, the young gladiators learned that survival meant more than strength. It was an art, a balance between pleasing the crowd and keeping oneself alive. Rome did not love those who merely endured, it adored those who entertained. The Lanista drilled this into their minds. Fight with fury but never without grace, he barked. The people do not pay to see fear, they pay to see courage carved into flesh. And so each man trained not only in weapons but in performance, how to taunt, how to fall, how to make a clash of steel sound like thunder. Some began to rise above the rest. A few heard nicknames whispered through the taverns of Rome: the Panther, swift and silent, the Hammer, whose blows shook armor like earthquakes. Their images were painted on walls, their names scratched into tiles by eager fans. Gladiators were slaves, yet in the eyes of the people they were gods of the sand. But fame was a double-edged sword. Those most loved by the crowd were pushed into more dangerous fights. A champion one day could lie dead the next, cut down for the sake of spectacle. The promise of freedom, the wooden sword, the rudis, dangled like a dream, granted only to the rare few who survived long enough and captured Rome's heart. Yet bonds formed among them. In the barracks, enemies by day became brothers by night. They shared bread, patched each other's wounds, and whispered of the world beyond the arena, of families left behind, of freedom that seemed like a distant star. Some even swore oaths. If one lived long enough to be freed, he would honor the names of those who fell beside him. Still, every morning the horn would sound. Another match, another chance to die, and as the crowd screamed for blood, each gladiator understood their lives were coins spent in the treasury of Rome's entertainment.
The day of the great games arrived.
The Colosseum roared with the voice of 50,000 souls, a living beast of stone and flesh. The emperor himself sat upon the marble throne, his hand resting lazily on the cushion, the same hand that could decide life or death with a single gesture. The gladiators marched into the arena in a solemn procession. Sunlight poured down, turning the sand into gold, though they knew it was soon to be dyed crimson. The crowd cheered wildly, each man greeted not as a slave, but as a hero walking into legend. The first clashes erupted like storms. Steel rang, dust rose, bodies fell. Every blow was met with thunderous applause, every act of bravery etched into memory. Among them, the young fighter, once a nameless captive, now stood at the center, his skill and defiance drawing the eyes of the masses. He had become more than a man, he was a symbol, a vessel for the people's hunger for glory. At last, he faced his final opponent, a veteran champion, scarred, brutal, and feared. Silence swept over the Colosseum as the two circled each other. The duel was long, savage, relentless. Shields splintered, blades bent, blood slicked the sand. When the champion finally fell, gasping on the ground, all eyes turned to the emperor. The crowd shouted in unison, "Mitte, mitte, spare him." Others cried, "Jugula, kill." The young gladiator stood, chest heaving, his fate suspended in the emperor's hand. At that moment, he was neither slave nor free. He was the heart of Rome itself. The thumb descended. The choice was made. Some gladiators lived to taste freedom, raising the wooden sword high as tears streamed down their faces. Others became eternal in death, their names remembered longer than the men who ruled them. For in Rome, emperors rose and fell, but the legends of the arena never faded. In the end, the gladiator's life was not measured in years, but in moments, in the roar of the crowd, in the clash of steel, in the fleeting instant when blood, sand, and glory became one.